Over the past several seasons, we've told the stories of children who couldn't read and the families and teachers who tried to help them inside systems that weren't built to succeed. We listened to the pain, we traced the history, we followed the science, and one truth kept rising to the surface. This is not a mystery, and it's no longer a debate. Reading failure harms children first, but responsibility does not stop there. In Season 4 of My Child Can't Read, A Heartland Crisis, we widen the lens to examine the state of literacy in Kansas and across America. This season begins with harm, the lived reality of children and families, and follows it upward through classrooms, policy, and institutions. Because when the evidence is clear, when solutions are proven, neutrality disappears. This is a season about what happens next, about the difference between knowing what works and taking responsibility for it. Welcome to Season 4, The State of Literacy. Before we go further, we need to name something that shapes everything in this conversation. In Kansas, education doesn't operate like most parts of state government. It's not controlled by the governor, not directed by the legislature, not decided by the courts or the judicial branch. Constitutional authority over public education rests with the Kansas State Board of Education. And that matters because the board is responsible for setting direction, for guiding standards, and for shaping what education can look like across the state. But the board doesn't work alone. The Kansas State Department of Education, led by the commissioner, is responsible for carrying that work out, supporting schools, and implementing those decisions across Kansas. The department doesn't make the policy, it carries it out. And at the center of that work is the Commissioner of Education, the person responsible for turning direction into reality, for guiding implementation, shaping priorities, and influencing what actually reaches schools and classrooms across the state. Which means even when decisions are made at the top, what happens next depends heavily on how those decisions are carried forward. And right now, as Kansas State Board members finalize their decision on the next Commissioner of Education, those choices matter more than ever. Because the State Board of Education is elected by the people of Kansas, serving 4-year terms to represent districts across the state. And one of their most important responsibilities is hiring the Commissioner of Education, the person who leads the department and carries those decisions forward. The commissioner isn't elected and does not serve a fixed term. Instead, the role continues as long as the board entrusts them with it, with the authority to hire and remove the commissioner through their vote. Which means when leadership changes, direction can change too. Earlier this season, we described this structure as something that functions almost like a fourth branch of government. And if you're just joining us, that one structure helps explain why change in education doesn't always move the way people expect it to. Because when authority, implementation, and accountability are spread across a system like this, it raises a bigger question. If outcomes aren't improving, who is responsible for changing them? So, if the State Board of Education holds that authority, what does that actually look like in practice? What does it mean to be responsible for education across the entire state? The responsibility is real, and so is the weight of it. Because at this level, decisions aren't just theoretical. They shape what gets taught, how teachers are prepared, and what students experience every single day. But even with that authority, the system itself is complex. Because decisions don't move directly from policy to child, they move through systems. From policy to preparation to classrooms. And at every step, something can break. Because authority alone doesn't guarantee change. It requires alignment. It requires clarity. And it requires systems built to carry it through. And when those pieces aren't fully in place, even the people with the authority to lead change can find themselves working inside a system that resists it. So if authority exists, why doesn't change happen faster? Because even at the highest levels, decisions don't happen in a vacuum. They exist inside systems with real constraints, funding structures, policy timelines, and competing priorities. And deeply embedded structures and long-held beliefs about how children learn to read. And once you start asking why change stalls, you run into another reality. Not just how much is spent, but how it's spent. At the Kansas Policy Institute, James Franco has looked closely at how funding and accountability actually work in this state.
It can't just be about how much is spent. It has to be about how it's being spent. And we know this from our own lives. You know, when we're doing our family budgets, it's not just, oh, if we just spend more, we'll get the outcome.
And that matters because when money is misaligned, support is misaligned too. In Kansas, a significant portion of the state budget is already dedicated to education. We spend roughly $17,000 to $18,000 per student each year, adding up to more than $7 billion statewide. But even when funding is allocated, it doesn't always translate to classroom change. In 2026, Kansas lawmakers introduced Senate Bill 517, an effort to strengthen literacy accountability by requiring more coordination and reporting across the system, from the State Board of Education to teacher preparation programs to districts themselves. It's designed to track outcomes more closely and to ensure that the people being trained to teach reading are aligned with what the state says should be happening in classrooms. On paper, it's progress. But here's the tension. Policies can measure reading. They can track outcomes. They can require alignment. But they don't teach a child to read. And they don't always reach the teacher who was never taught how. And that's where another layer of the problem appears. Policy can set direction, but it cannot guarantee what happens next.
My son Cooper couldn't read, not because he wasn't smart, but because no one had taught him how. I had to find answers myself.
This is what the gap looks like. And these stories, they're not isolated. They are the result of systems that weren't fully aligned with what we now know works. So if authority exists and constraints are real, what actually leads to change? Because at some point, understanding the system isn't enough. There has to be a shift from responsibility to accountability. Not accountability as blame, but accountability as alignment, where decisions, training, and practice are working toward the same outcome. Because what gets measured, what gets supported, and what gets prioritized is what changes student outcomes.
That energetic, fun soul that he had is blossomed in every way. It's blossomed in his reading passion. He reads all the time.
This isn't theoretical. It's happening when the system supports it. The difference isn't the child. It isn't the teacher. It's the system surrounding them. And when that system changes, everything changes. Which brings us back to the original question. Who holds the power? Because the truth is, power doesn't live in just one place. It lives in alignment across policy, preparation, and classrooms. And when those pieces align, change doesn't just become possible. It becomes inevitable. So the question now isn't whether we know what works. It's whether we are willing to build the system to support it. Because we've seen what's possible in research, in classrooms, in the lives of children who were finally taught the way they needed. So this moment isn't about discovery anymore. It's about decision. Whether we continue with systems that were never built to fully support reading success, or we begin to build ones that are. Because across this season, we've seen what responsibility looks like. Teachers who care deeply and keep showing up. Parents who advocate when something doesn't feel right. Leaders who are working to improve outcomes. And systems that are beginning to shift. This isn't about blame. It never was. Because the people inside the system have been doing the best they can with what they were given. But now we know more. And when proof exists, what responsibility demands changes too. It means aligning preparation with what we know works. It means supporting teachers with the tools they were never given. It means building systems that don't leave implementation to chance. And it means ensuring that every child, not just some, has access to instruction that actually works. Because this isn't just a policy conversation. It's a child sitting in a classroom trying to make sense of words that were never clearly taught. And every one of us, educators, leaders, policymakers, parents, community members, has a role to play in what happens next. Because this is a crisis we already know how to solve. And when we align what we know with what we do, change isn't just possible. It becomes inevitable. Thanks for listening to My Child Can't Read, a Heartland Crisis. If this episode resonated with you, if you saw your child, your classroom, or your community in these stories, you're not alone. Now is the time to act. Every child can learn to read, and we all share responsibility to make it happen. I invite you to take action today by subscribing to catch every episode, rating and reviewing to help others find this series, sharing your story and learning how the Phillips Fundamental Learning Center is changing lives at funlearn.org/podcast, and by sharing this show with a friend, teacher, or parent who needs to hear it. All resources, source credits, and tools mentioned in this episode can be found in the show notes. Together, we can take responsibility and rewrite the story of literacy, one child, one classroom, and one school at a time right here in the Heartland.